So, um, Wednesday we started a new chapter and we talked about words associated with lines. So now what we're going to do is talk about words associated with angles. Now you should be more familiar with these. You'll see as I go down, most of the time first years have done a bit of this in primary school. So again, if we were in school, today's class would just be all about explaining all these different words and have you take notes down on them so that you have them all together. I'm not going to give you any homework again uh, for that reason, because we just need to get these kind of basics all written down, and there's a good bit of notes in it, so that's going to take you, I'd say it'll take you the guts of the hour anyway. Okay, so in order to have an angle, you need to have two lines. Okay, so let's use actual lines again. So there's one, and then there's another. Yeah, so I just chose them randomly. This is one arm of the angle, and this is the other arm of the angle. And depending on where you put those arms, how can I edit this? Hang on, let me try something. Okay, right. So there's one arm. Now, if I draw the second arm, right, so I have control of it now. If I put that here, that makes a very, very small angle. As I lift it up, the angle is getting bigger. Does that make sense? Okay, and I can rotate it and rotate it and rotate it and keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, all the way back around. Okay, so the angle, I'm going to drop this and I'll try and get it again. The angle, I need two hands here. The angle is this bit in here, okay? It's the join between the two, right? So if I go back and start lifting that again, okay? So you can see here, the distance between the two arms is quite a small value. And then as I lift it, it gets bigger, and so on and so forth, okay? So you need two lines like that to make an angle. Two lines joining essentially makes an angle, and the two lines are referred to as arms. And the point where they join, so this point here, sort of like the corner, is called a vertex. Okay, and then if you have something like, do I have that shape? Yep, if you have something like a triangle, it's gonna work. Yep. Okay, so if you look here, here's an arm, and here's an arm, and those two arms join together here, so we have a vertex, and in between the two arms, we have an angle, okay? Or you can go over here, and this line's an arm, this line's an arm. That makes where they join a vertex, and then there's an angle in between. Okay, and because it's a triangle, there's three of them. So here's an arm, here's an arm. They join together at a vertex, and then the space in between them makes an angle. Yeah? So we would say, just to give you the plural of the word, we would say that a triangle has three, and we wouldn't say three corners, we would say three vertices. So the plural of vertex is vertices. Okay? Right. So in order to have an angle, you need two lines called arms that join together at a point called a vertex. And then to get the angle, you're looking at the space in between those two lines. Okay? So they're talking about a couple of rotations here. Okay, so I'm just going to set up my little diagram over here again. So we'll talk about this in a lot more detail as we go through, but this here is generally one arm, and then the other one is kind of the rotating arm, and there is a reason for that, but I'm not going to talk about it now. Okay, so there's my line. Okay, so if I drop it down so that one line is on top of the other line, and I start rotating, okay, we always rotate in an anti-clockwise direction, okay? So if I start rotating, at that point, I've got a quarter of a rotation. Keep going. This point here, I'm at half. Keep going. 3/4. And then when you're back around, you've done a full turn. Yeah, so we start from one line on top of the other, which is 0 degrees, because there's no space between them. There's only space between them when I lift up. So that's 0 degrees. Rotate up, that's a quarter of the way around. Then we're at halfway round. Keep going, we're at 3/4 the way around, and then a full rotation back to the start. Yeah? So a complete rotation, you can see over here, has 360 degrees in it. Okay, so if you stand and look at a picture or something and turn all the way around so that you're looking at the picture again, you have turned through 360 degrees. Okay, and then half a rotation is half of 360, which is 180 degrees. Okay, and something, we'll talk about it further down, but something that's really important about that half rotation. Try and do it again. Yep. Well, anyway, it's not perfect, but right. So if I go back to my 0, there's 0. Go up to a quarter, there's my 1/4, and then keep going, right, onto half a rotation. If I drop that there, half a rotation, I know that's not perfect, but half a rotation is a straight line. Yeah? So half a rotation, 180 degrees, is a straight line. Okay, which is important. And then a 1/4 rotation is 90 degrees, also known as a right angle, which you possibly would have known already as well. Okay, now we'll talk about the angles further down as well, but just to relate them to rotations. Yeah, okay, so then we go down, a null angle. Okay, now when you're doing your notes on this, sort of take the null angle and take is 0 degrees. Okay, so the null angle is where I started there a minute ago, when you have there. Okay, so a null angle is when one line is directly on top of the other. So you have absolutely no space between them. If you have no space between them, you have no angle. Yeah, that's a null angle. Okay, so a null angle when the first one, when it hasn't started its rotation, when arm number 2 is sitting on top of arm number 1 and the angle is 0. Next one, now here's some you might have heard of, right? An acute angle. Okay, so an acute angle, now it has it there in real kind of mathsy language, but an acute angle is over here. Less than 90 degrees, but bigger than 0 degrees. Okay, so I mean, I would be, if it was me, in my notes, I'd be writing it like this. Okay, you don't need to write this kind of thing in maths language. You need to write it so you can understand it. So an acute angle is an angle that's less than 90 degrees, but it's bigger than 0. So if that continued, like if this arm here continued to fall until it was sitting on top of this arm, then you would no longer call it an acute angle. You'd call it a null angle. Yeah? So anything from 1 degree up to 89 point whatever degrees is an acute angle. Okay? Once you reach that 90, you now have a right angle. Okay? A right angle, I'm going to get rid of that, actually can't really see it. A right angle is 90 degrees. Okay, so you should, essentially what I would like you to take in your notes is the heading, a description, and a picture. Okay, so the descriptions are in the orange boxes, but like I said, if they're very mathematical, it might be nicer to write them in more understandable, just regular English. So heading, picture, description. Okay, same for the null angle. Heading, picture, description. Right angle. Picture of it, description. And this symbol, these are the symbols here that are used. So if you saw an angle in an exam and they had a little box in the corner, or an angle and they had a little L in the corner, they're telling you that they're 90-degree angles. This one is much more used in exams. Okay, but they both mean the same thing. Okay, so moving on then to an obtuse angle. So an obtuse angle is when you go beyond the 90. Okay, so it is an angle bigger than 90 but less than 180. Okay, that's for obtuse. Now, moving down, a 180-degree angle is actually called a straight angle. Okay, and remember up here, I told you that when you rotate this up and around and keep going until you get to half a rotation is 180 degrees. And when you're at that point, the line looks straight. So for that reason, it's called a straight angle. Okay, so a straight angle looks like this. So it essentially looks like a straight line and it's 180 degrees. Okay, reflex then. So I always think of a reflex break. I don't know if anybody is unlucky enough to have one, but if you try to imagine either your leg or your arm. So if you straighten your arm, hold it out beside you, and then try to imagine knocking down on your hand so that you break through your elbow. That's called a reflex break. And if you look at this picture, ow. But yeah, so it's an angle that is bigger than 180 but less than 360. Okay, so that's a reflex angle. So it's title, picture, description. Yeah? At a full angle then. So a full angle is when you start at the start, you lift up the arm, go all the way around, 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 and back to the start. And a full angle is a full turn, which is 360 degrees. So those ones, a lot of people might have heard of. This is just from my experience, and maybe you haven't, but like those acute, right, obtuse, a lot of the time first years know those. So if you do, great. If you don't, obviously you now need to know them. These ones down here are definitely not mentioned at in primary school. So an ordinary angle. Okay, so an ordinary angle, if you can see from here, an ordinary angle is greater than 0 and less than 180. Okay, so an ordinary angle, let me just write this. Okay, so bigger than 0 and less than 180. So an ordinary angle is an acute angle or a right angle or an obtuse angle. Does that make sense? So this kind of encompasses, an ordinary angle encompasses 3 different angles. Acute, right, and obtuse. Okay, so it's kind of like an overarching description of these three. So you could say that angle is ordinary and it would cover you for all three. Does that make sense? Um, so yeah, it's not used very widely because most of the time in an exam they want to know, do you know the difference between an acute angle and an obtuse angle? But I have seen it used in exam questions. So just things like they'd say like note the answer is an ordinary angle, something like that. So they're giving you a hint that the answer is definitely less than 180, that type of thing. But obviously they don't want to give you too much of a hint. So just because the word ordinary is very ordinary, as in it's a very mundane word in the English language and doesn't really feel mathematical, so just that you know what it means in a mathematical context. And then the last one is something that you use. I don't know why it's not a heading, it should be. It's kind of lumped in, but supplementary angles add up to 180. Okay? And they can be right beside each other like this, okay, where they're actually touching. And then they're supplementary and they add up to 180. Or they can be two totally separate angles. So 55 angle here and a totally separate angle of 125. They add up to 180, so they're just considered supplementary. Okay, so that's it. Loads of notes there to be taken down. And if you've any time left in your hour, just quiz yourself on it. Check, do you know it? I'm going to use, now there's a couple of other things that are kind of basics, but I prefer to teach them later on. But you need to be able to describe all of these things that we've talked about this week. Okay, so take down your notes, listen to the video, obviously, take down your notes. Like I'm obviously trying to annotate here and add in additional notes, but if there's anything I say that you feel should be written down, just like in class, write it down. Make sure your notes are complete. And like I said, if you look up at the clock and you've got 10 minutes left, then quiz yourself. Give the copy if there's somebody in the house who has 5 minutes. Give the copy and get them to quiz you on like what is an obtuse angle. And you have to be able to tell them that is an angle that is bigger than 90, less than 180. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so that is Friday's work. So Monday we will continue and get through as much of these geometry chapters as we can. Okay.